All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. We got some news and up to date things to kind of chat about because there's a massive strike that finally kicked off yesterday. I was briefly aware of what was happening, but didn't pay too much attention to it because there's always threats of striking and things of that nature in large corporations. So I was like, okay, that happens basically every time they renegotiate their contracts. There's always a threat, but they went through with it, which is absolutely bonkers to me. And for those unaware, essentially the Longshoremen's Union, which affects basically the entire East Coast ports, went on strike effective yesterday morning. So they're officially not working. The companies are fast trying to hire what are in the industry parlance known as scabs. Basically, these are non-union workers to try and kind of make things still move forward. The union has stated that they will still process things like military equipment. So apparently that's still going through, but food, all that stuff is at a standstill. So this matters for a number of reasons. One, if this continues, it will start to affect retail as a whole. And therefore, if you're doing OARA and the supply side of things is starting to quickly diminish and the demand is not, then you're going to run into a massive problem where you just can't source. Things are just going to be out of stock. We're already starting to see some videos of regular people just stocking up in case. We were talking before we press record here. I don't think we're going to feel the effects until stores stop restocking things. That's when there will be an actual panic, when it becomes tangible. This is kind of weird timing, right? Q4, I mean, we're in Q4 officially now. So it's very weird timing, first and foremost, especially with the hurricane relief things that are occurring. I think it's kind of a weird move to make. But another thing, I dug deeper into this because I don't spend a whole lot of time studying how American ports work, but this got me kind of interested. And I found out that basically you're not allowed to operate a port without a union, which is interesting. And so apparently the big issue here is not the pay raise issue. I think they were offered 50% increase. They wanted 75%. But the big thing that they've been talking about on air is basically a ban on automation. They're like, we just don't want automation. And apparently some of the companies have started to still do some automation, which, listen, I'm Mr. Automation. I'm a tech guy. It drives me insane that our ports are not already relatively automated. And when you dig deeper into things, you start to understand the mechanics of how our ports work. And as far as I understand it, they have these concepts of touches, right? How many times a crane touches a container? Well, there's a fee associated with that touch. So because that's in the mechanics of the model, companies want to reduce the amount of touches. But the second order of doing that makes things far less efficient, which is so crazy to me. If you look at other countries that don't have this problem, they might touch a container 3-5 times because that's the most efficient route to move it, regionally and all that stuff. We can't do that. And so there's two big kind of perspectives on this. One is no automation, protect the jobs. The other place is like, hey, this is a national security issue. The fact that one union can basically hold hostage the entire country is by itself a massive problem. And automation should have been there anyways. If you look at China, there's videos of all the crane workers working in an office using 5G to control things. So like the tech exists, we're just intentionally choosing not to do it. But this will, if it continues and doesn't get sorted out, will affect Amazon sellers. And if you think about it, it already is, right? Like the costs associated are kind of abstracted away from you because you're not, unless you're doing private label, you're buying directly from a brand, a retail store, a distributor, what have you. And so you're not really seeing those fees attached, but that is certainly going to be baked into the cost of what you're paying for. And so if we have a very inefficient logistics system, it's going to cost more, period. So we've been paying for this in one way, shape, or another. So, as I think about how this could affect sellers, I really only have like two pieces of advice. The first one is you need to be tripling down on sourcing now, like immediately. Just like regular humans are like, I need to stock up on things. It's the same concept here, right? So if you're used to spending 8 hours a day sourcing, you might need to increase that number of days, whatever, because eventually it can run dry, the supply side. Now, the second piece is you don't want to be moving inventory too fast now, right? This is basic economics. As the supply side decreases and the demand holds strong, the price itself should increase. We know this going into Q4 anyways. We know that as we get closer to the actual buying season, which we're not quite there yet, prices will increase because the supply is not necessarily increasing, but the demand certainly is. So if you pair those two things together, stock up a ton and then kind of protect your profits and not move things too fast, you should be okay. Because the thing you really want to avoid here is running out of inventory. That's what these two kind of thought processes solve, right? We're just saying don't run out of inventory, especially going to, and the worst thing is you run out of inventory before Q4 actually gets here. And listen, if you're going to be doing 70-something% of your annual sales in Q4 alone, and you sell out before that, think of the opportunity cost and the missed opportunity of selling out too fast. This is why I've been pushing a lot on Twitter using Maven, things of that nature, things that are really going to protect those things. This is why we harp so much on dynamic repricing, because things like the longshoremen union strike doesn't see, I mean, most sellers are probably unaware of it, but it will affect you or could affect you. And the issue is if it does affect you and you don't know what's causing it, you can't react to it. You don't really know what to do. But when you have something like Maven, an AI model that can actually understand, obviously not that the longshoremen union is striking, it doesn't know that, but understand how, okay, the market itself is changing on each individual listing. Let me react to that. That's a protective layer. I think a lot of times when we're talking about repricing, it's like, hey, more margin and more sales. Awesome. But it's also a safety net in a way, right? It's keeping you from selling too low. It's keeping you from running out of stock or moving things too fast. So when you kind of shift your perspective on this a little bit, it starts to make way more sense. In programming, there's this concept called self-healing code. It's not used a ton, but basically you can't always predict where something will go bad. But it's kind of like a safety net in like a savings account, right? You should have 3 to 6 months of savings. Well, why? In case of an emergency. Well, which emergency? I have no idea. I can never predict the emergency that will occur, but I can predict that an emergency could occur. Therefore, let me just, batch, kind of be aware of that. It's the same concept here. And so in the coding example, you create it in such a way that it can really well handle certain scenarios and correct itself, which code usually doesn't do. You have to tell it to do that. But you can build it in such a way that it can kind of self-fix it. A good example here, your database went down. Okay, well, it's 9 out of 10 times one of two scenarios. If it's, check if it's scenario A, do X. If it's scenario B, do Y. And then it can do it itself instead of a human jumping in there. All these kind of things point to the exact same thing. You need to be dynamic, flexible. Some might even say anti-fragile, right? If you're used to like Nassim Taleb's book concept. And I think these kind of macro situations really highlight the importance of repricing, because you cannot predict exactly how things will change. We have some theories and have some ideas of how it could, but the reality is I don't know until it occurs. And for all we know, this evening, they could be like, we reached an agreement. We're good. We're done. Okay, cool. Crisis averted. We're fine here. It could hit us a lot. It could hit us in a little bit. It's hard to say. But this also highlights, a lot of sellers are trying to avoid platform risk, right? So just selling on one platform and going multi-channel reduces that risk, which is awesome. But we still have risk. Businesses always have risk. And, if our logistics go down, that's a risk. And just like that savings account, that emergency fund account concept, you kind of need to have that here too, right? Like, it's always recommended. We do this at Aura, like, have 3 to 6 months of your costs just in the bank, just in case. You never know. And some sellers might be like, yeah, but I'm not spending that. Correct. But what you're doing is you're protecting the thing that you built, right? When you're first getting started, you're putting fuel to the fire as fast as you can. But eventually, when you have something of value, now we need to shift a little bit of our focus over to protecting the thing that we built. And I've seen countless numbers of sellers ramp up really fast and then burn out and go to zero and go get a job because they were too aggressive when they should have been a little bit more, 10, 20% more conservative on certain things. They would have been okay. There are sellers that don't have any, they get a payout, they ship it back in with new inventory, and that sounds awesome, but you're basically living paycheck to paycheck as a business from that perspective. You have no way of, you might be 2 weeks away from basically shutting down shop. That's not good. You want to know, cool, I got 3 months, 6 months. If it completely blows up, I got time to figure it out. And do I think I can solve most problems in 3 months? Yeah, I think I can. Okay, so we'll go 3 months there. So it's an interesting thing, right? I oddly enough like when these things occur because it kind of shifts our perspective and makes us think a little deeper. And I think we need to do that more often. But Casey, I'm curious I've been rambling here, but I'm curious to get your thoughts.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, it is a really interesting, situation. And like you said, there's a lot of different moving pieces and factors right now. We don't know how severe it's going to be, if it's going to be severe at all. We don't know if it's going to impact all of retail, all products, or just some products. So I think really emphasizing the fact that Maven and its ability to kind of assess these changing factors on a listing to listing basis is very important right now, because it could affect, a major group of products, but not all products. So being able to kind of differentiate between those on its own is pretty essential. But I mean, as we know, sourcing is always the most important thing you can do for your business. A repricer is only as effective as it can be based on your MINS, which is directly tied to your sourcing ability, or your sourcing performance rather. So I think kind of doubling down on now is the time to make sure that you're making those intelligent buys, doing that maybe little bit extra research than you might typically do before you make a buy or a bet on a specific item or SKU. I think now's the time to really focus on those things. And yeah, it reminds me back when, when COVID first started, I was working in the Shopify space, and I had a lot of clients that just had inventory tied up in the ports and it couldn't come in because this, that, the other thing. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on ports and their workings or whatnot, but a similar situation back then. So yeah, definitely now is the time to maybe be, like you said, a little bit more conservative, maybe taking a hit on sales velocity, ensuring that your inventory stretches out a little bit more as we approach Q4. Yeah, definitely all different things to consider there. So yeah, I think the importance of Maven's really kind of a thing to double down on right now. Its ability to kind of take away the complexity for you, especially now when you may not want to or have the time to spend on fully analyzing your inventory that's already in. You really want to be focusing on sourcing right now anyway. So kind of having Maven do that for you on its own in the background is really an advantageous approach, just to make sure that you're using the time in the best way that you can right now.
Yeah. And for the record, I think you should be conservative in terms of your pricing right now to not run out of stock, but you should be hyper aggressive on your sourcing front. That's I think if you take that multi approach, I think you'll be completely fine no matter what happens. But yeah, to your point, and I highlighted this in my presentation at AMZ United, we as humans cannot react fast enough to the things that are occurring in the market. And the market is irrational. That's one thing we certainly do know. So people might overreact, people might underreact. And it's really hard to kind of measure that at a listing product level, but Maven can. And I think that really highlights the importance of using technology and leaning on technology, especially in slightly chaotic times, right? So we have a few questions here. Appreciate everybody joining in. We're just kind of ranting on some news and some thoughts here, but open format here. Whatever questions you guys have related to Aura, repricing, what's happening in the news, anything like that, happy to dive deep into and go down any rabbit holes. Let's see, Christian, I noticed that when a buyer with a lot more reviews than me come on a listing, I don't touch the buy box at all, and the repricer doesn't react to that. So This is one of those cases where I would say reach out to support, because I would want to check the listing details as well as the strategy settings that you're utilizing to make sure there's no issues there. Because it could just, the way it the settings are set, it may not need to. You want it to based on what you're thinking, but the strategy itself could be designed not to in that case. So I don't want to give any kind of advice that's not hyper personalized in this situation. So definitely reach out to support. Want to make sure we give you like a really direct answer there that is specific to you. Let's see, John, on a suppressed buy box listing, should I use a rule-based strategy in pursuit to match buy box, undercut by a penny, or use Maven? Okay, so this really depends. Both your Maven and rule-based strategies can or will automatically handle suppressed buy boxes. So Maven, as an example, by default will automatically handle that unless you check that off in the advanced tab. By default, it's on. So that will automatically handle it for you. Now, rule-based, it depends on how it's structured. So for a rule-based strategy to automatically handle suppressed listings, you need a few things. The first thing is the competition type. So what you're targeting needs to be set to the buy box. Then in the pursuit section where it says when there is no competition, and if you change the word competition to your competition type, that will then read when there is no buy box. You set that to then lower by 2 pennies, which will happen automatically every 2 to 3 minutes on average, until one of two things happen. Either we recover the buy box, we go back to normal, or you reach your minimum price, in which case, depending on your other settings, it might leave it there, it might raise it to your max. That kind of depends. In terms of what I recommend here, I would probably recommend Maven, but it depends on the listing and kind of what you're going for. There are times when velocity matters way more in that case, in which case I would probably urge you to have a rule-based strategy targeting the buy box. But that's going to lead to more downward pressure, right? So it depends. If you got hundreds of units and you really need to move it, I would go the buy box targeting rule-based strategy route. If it's kind of like a regular run-of-the-mill listing, I would probably default to Maven. But Casey, I know you deal with this a lot.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, generally, we recommend, and the reason Maven is automatically designed to unsuppress the buy box, and same with the default settings in the buy box targeting strategy, is that's kind of our best practice. That's what we recommend, unsuppressing that buy box. When the buy box is suppressed, naturally sales velocity is going to be lower. So we do recommend unsuppressing that buy box. Understanding there are situations where there's a buy box that's typically suppressed and you want to keep it there, that would be a different scenario. But I would agree with what Dylan said. If you're more focused on the sales velocity, lean towards the buy box targeting strategy with that when there's no competition setting, it'll say customize price, current price minus 2 cents, and that'll incrementally kind of drop that price for you. That's what I would recommend there. If it is maybe a newer listing and you're not as much focused on the sales velocity side of things, I'd stick to Maven. But yeah, that's generally what I recommend in those specific scenarios there.
Awesome.
I was going to say, yeah, and Christian, so in regards to kind of your follow-up question here, does Maven consider sellers' reviews? So Maven doesn't necessarily take that into account. It more so is looking on offers from competition, sales coming in at different price points, the buy box data, whether it gets suppressed or unsuppressed at certain points. That's what Maven is going to be observing. But we know that Amazon's algorithm for determining who the buy box winner is some combination of shipping times, seller ratings / reviews and price. But their algorithm isn't public. There are times where I've seen them prioritize one specific offer when there's another offer that has better shipping times, better reviews, and a better price. So unfortunately, there's no like silver bullet for winning the buy box there. In your first question, my assumption might be that they maybe have just a couple more reviews, but you have a better price. But or won't continue to price down to have you win the buy box. That's just a setting to prevent you from cutting your margins too thin or kind of price tanking on a listing. But short answer, Maven doesn't consider seller reviews, but Amazon does consider them when determining the buy box winner.
Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it's not very clear cut, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
Welcome to operating AI and algorithms on top of a black box. TK here. I don't use Maven that much, but I find Hyperdrive to be extremely useful. Is there an option to buy additional Hyperdrive listings? So we don't have that set up as an add-on. That's something we have considered. But what I can say is if you jump up to the next tier, you get far more Hyperdrive credits. So if you go from Essential to Plus, it doubles. or more than doubles. And then if you go from plus to pro, it doubles again. So top amount we can offer is 50 period. So that's the kind of cap there. But with each additional tier you go up, you get more workflow usage, more Maven AI listings. One thing I would definitely urge you to do is spend a little bit more time using Maven and testing Maven. And if you haven't done an onboarding session with our team with Finn yet, I would definitely have you reach out to support and just request one. Finn can walk you through setting that up and make sure you truly understand when and how to use it. Especially again, going into Q4 and all this craziness with the strike happening, I'm urging more and more sellers to utilize something like Maven to really handle all that complexity for you. See, Marissa, when competing against FBA as a merchant seller, are there recommended pricing strategies specific to FBM? This kind of shifts a little bit. The general rule of thumb is that you reprice below by like a percentage or two the lowest FBA offer. Now, does that work 100% of the time? No. There are cases due to things like regional buy boxes where you can actually match the buy box and be okay and totally be fine and have great margins. So I would say test it. That's the hard one. FBM is a little bit more difficult because it makes things less equal, if that makes sense. Like if everybody's in FBA, again, assuming we're all equally distributed in regional buy boxes is kind of factored out, it's a lot easier to kind of manipulate that. But Casey, do you have any insights on the FBM side of things that you guys typically do?
Yeah, it does vary, pretty heavily from one listing to another. What I typically recommend in this scenario is using a rule-based strategy. If you're, I always say use Maven. Maven does take into account, FBM versus FBA. But if you are focused on targeting specifically the buy box or sales velocity, the two approaches that I typically recommend would just be the buy box targeting strategy, targeting that buy box and either selecting to match the price or price below being an FBM offer, and the buy box winner typically being an FBA offer. I recommend probably bumping that 2-cent margin maybe to the 5-cent neighborhood, give or take. So I would recommend that. Alternatively, I would recommend the lowest FBA then buy box targeting option. That would focus on the lowest FBA offer. And if there are no FBA offers, then it would focus on the buy box. So that kind of takes care of both scenarios where you're targeting the lowest FBA offer, which more often than not is that buy box winner. But if you're only competing with FBM offers on that listing, then you would compete with the buy box winner in that scenario. So that's typically what I recommend for FBM, just using one of those two competition types, only buy box or FBA then buy box, and perhaps just bumping that margin from the 2-cent mark to the 4 or 5-cent mark, just to give yourself a little bit more wiggle room to try and take that from the competition.
See, TK, the one feature I hope you guys would implement in the near future is an option to ignore a certain seller ID on a listing. Yes. So actually, if you go to feedback.goaura.com, it should auto authenticate you. So you'll have an account there. You can actually see if that's already on the feature requests list, upvote it if it is. If not, go ahead and add it with all the details you want there. That way other users can vote on it as well. So we have a public roadmap there, but totally agree with you there.
Yeah, that's definitely been requested by others. So TK, you should be able to find that, vote that one.
Exactly. See, is there a way for Maven not to compete with FBM offer price other than using manual targeting methods? So there's no control like that. We intentionally make it as flexible as possible to handle far more scenarios. So you won't be able to go into Maven and say, hey, don't do this. Because there are times when you kind of do need to do that. Now it does, like Casey mentioned earlier, does understand what's your offer type and what's the competition's offer type as well. So it's not just looking at pricing, right? It's understanding, okay, well, that's a used item. I can do something different than if that's a new FBA offer. So that does get factored in, which is important, but there's no way to go in and say, hey, don't factor in merchant fulfilled offers. For that, you would need to go into a rule-based strategy. That's gonna be your best bet there. See, John, will Amazon give me more buy box share if I am the creator of a listing, given that that keep inventory in stock and have good seller metrics? I created a listing 3 months ago, and now there are 20 sellers, not private label, by the way. No, Amazon could care less, to be frank, as far as I've experienced. Yeah, if you're a private label and the only seller, obviously that's one thing. But there is no weight given to you created the listing. There's really not much ownership on listings in the way that you're kind of alluding to here, because one of those 20 other sellers on that listing could go in and say, I want to submit updates. And if that's a better update, then they're going to update to that data. So definitely not going to be the case at all. Let's see, Prince. In analyzing some of Maven's pricing activity, I noticed that when it chose to undercut a competitor, it would do so in increments of 2 pennies. Does this mean that the industry-wide practice of penny undercutting isn't even a good strategy? Meaning, is Maven telling us 1 penny is not enough when you want to / need to undercut? So not necessarily. What we're doing intentionally is we're testing to what degree we need to be below to win the buy box. So when you're against some competitors, and actually we were just talking about this in a roundabout way with the different reviews, right? Let's say you jump onto a listing, another seller has way more reviews than you, way more inventory, so Amazon's prioritizing them. You might need to be 40 cents beneath that seller to actually pull the buy box from them on that one listing. Now, a third competitor on the same listing, you could probably match them and rotate perfectly. So what we need to do is we need a way to basically exponentially test where does that line cross, and then understand, okay, that's the profile for that competitor. So what we're doing is we're intentionally doing this 2 pennies because it goes a little bit faster. So you want to think about the penny undercutting from the stance of speed, because at a certain point you reach a critical threshold where Amazon goes, that's good enough for me, given all the variables here. So if we do 1 penny and let's say it takes 15 minutes to get there, well, if I do 2 pennies, in theory it should take half the time. So that allows us to go faster at finding what that threshold is and storing it and then moving on. That's the important part. So that's why we do the 2 pennies instead of 1 penny. So a good example of using this in other scenarios, if you're trying to recover the buy box, right? And what we talked about earlier, which you would say, okay, take my current price and lower it by 1 to 2 pennies every 2 to 3 minutes until I recover it. On some listings, I'll say, do 1 penny because you're not super far off. And I think it's going to be okay looking at the Keepa data. On other ones, I want to default to 2 pennies because, again, I can do it much faster. So on listings where there's not a ton of activity, I might want to do it faster so that we can recover it in minutes instead of hours or days. So there are cases where I want to do it 5 pennies because I want to go even faster because it matters even more, right? So if I'm missing out on tons of velocity and I have tons of units because the buy box got suppressed, well, now there's an opportunity cost problem for me not having a buy box period. And so I want to, as quickly as possible, grab it and then try and raise it back up to a healthier margin. So the 2 pennies thing really just helps us do that faster. This is good. Tony, can you guys let me know what the hot items for Q4 will be? Thanks in advance. I don't have a short list, but I will give some theory. So, having been a seller, granted, it's been a hot minute since I've been an active seller. For the record, I never really got on the trends. Chris Grant, on a recent video, diving deep into the buy box and stuff, brought this up, and he was talking, listen, everybody's about to go crazy about Christmas-based Lego sets. And he's like, yeah, there's money to be made all day long, but it's such a short-term thing that you also run a risk, right? You over-index on a certain category, on a certain product or product type, that if anything goes awry, you're kind of left stranded, and that's a problem. And so his recommendation, which I agree with, is you really want to have a diversified catalog in categories that tend to do well in Q4, but also do okay in Q1. That way, if you do have things left over, you're not stuck with it, right? It's kind of like the Halloween candy people. They make a ton of money, don't get me wrong, but then they're left with like a pallet of candy, and they're like, I guess I got to go donate it, which like, yeah, okay, cool. But like, that's hard to predict, right? It's hard to really predict those things super well. And most people are not doing prediction with real data. They're just looking at, well, how much did I sell? Okay, I think I can sell a little bit more this year. That's a guesstimate. So I really don't like those kind of trendy things. And, there was the Hatchables or whatever a few years ago. Again, people make money with it. But the issue is because everybody's targeting the same thing, what happens is you have an over-indexing on the supply side. So you have so much competition get ramped up, right? So it looks really nice when you first look at it, and then 50 other sellers jump on that listing with all kinds of different buy costs. and then it's just a bloodbath. And maybe that's okay for you. For me, I'm good. I don't like those things. I would rather look at what are things that are going to do incredibly well as a whole. Well, toys are probably going to do good. Makes a lot of sense, right? Okay. Well, do toys also do good in other quarters? Yeah, not nearly as good as Q4, but there's every day of the month or every day of the year, there's a kid's birthday party. Awesome. That's still going to be okay. So, things like toys, giftable things make a lot of sense. But again, I wouldn't over-index too hard because most things are going to go up in demand, period. Because, I get all kinds of, I ask for books for Christmas. I'm that weirdo. So like even books have in theory, have an increase in demand. So, it's hard to say like, okay, there's this one massive trend. Yeah, kind of. But like, there are smaller waves you can ride in aggregate and still do incredibly well, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like in my Shopify experience, there were different brands that we would work with that would be really successful in this time. And they would ask for, specifically, we were an email marketing company, so they'd ask for stuff like that. But one category that I always saw do really well in Q4 and Q1 was just winter clothing. If people don't buy anything for Christmas, it's still cold in January, February, and half of March, especially up here in New England. But trendy topics or trendy categories of items rather are always a little bit more risky because you do risk the saturation of sellers on those listings, and your margins can get trimmed pretty thin based on that competition. But I always recommend kind of looking at seasonal trends for like the actual seasons throughout the year. People are always looking to buy clothes. When you wear out of clothes, that's not really a seasonal thing. And then the other one that was always interesting on Shopify was like chocolates/candies, because if you have too many made, Valentine's Day is close enough that you can kind of double down, but then you get into heart-based candies and novelty stuff. So a little risky there as well. But I always recommend seasonal clothing is always an interesting place to take a look.
Tony already selling Lego Christmas sets. Definitely. Again, not a bad thing to do, but I hate to give any advice on like a particular thing. Let's see, Michael here. My pricing activity has done nothing in the last 4 days. What is going on? So a few things that could be occurring. One, you need to re-authenticate your account. Two, your subscription may have lapsed. What I would recommend is reach out to support. Finn's in there right now. Just reach out to support in the live chat. Just be like, hey, not seeing any repricing activity. Can you take a look and let me know what's going on? We'll tell you exactly what's happening. Let's see. Okay, Robert. Yeah, that's a good one here. Hey, everyone. I really can't understand why several of my listings keep getting deactivated because they're priced too high. I'm using Maven. Okay, so there are cases where Maven may set you too high relative to what Amazon likes. The good kind of rule of thumb there is whenever you are seeing that on particular listings, go ahead and override the dynamically set max prices on those listings. So if you see it consistently going, getting deactivated at $50, maybe set the max at 48, 49 to avoid that. We can't see everything, which is kind of frustrating. Again, we've mentioned this a handful of times, but we have noticed in the data, even on like the competitive pricing stuff, like the fair pricing policy stuff, it was only like 20% of listings that actually included that. And so when we see that kind of stuff, we can react to it. Sometimes though, it's not even in the API, but Amazon's like, we still think it's too high. How was I supposed to know that? There's nothing to indicate that's the case. So in those cases, what I would recommend, again, just manually override those. You're still going to have some of those from time to time, but that should kind of sort out that problem.
Yeah, Robert. Most commonly, the two reasons why you're going to get deactivated are the fair pricing policy. So your price is just too high, or you may have a set max in Seller Central, and the set max in Aura is higher than that. I always recommend deleting any max prices set in Seller Central so that you don't run into those errors, and that lets Aura kind of reprice where it may be. I still, in certain scenarios, recommend setting a min price in Seller Central. Sometimes Amazon Web Services is down. There's a delay between listings getting added there and being active in Aura. So setting a min price in Seller Central is still good for a safety net, but I definitely recommend wiping any set maxes, and that should get rid of any high pricing errors. If it's a high pricing error, it's tied to a set max. If it's a fair pricing policy, it's tied to just the general price being too high.
Yeah. I love this. Off topic, but make sure people don't sign up for Aura instead of Go Aura. Yeah, so Aura.com is not us. We're not a security company. That domain was, if I'm not mistaken, many millions of dollars just to purchase the domain. Then a VC-backed company bought it up. They raised obviously millions and millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. And one of their spokesmen is Robert Downey Jr. So they're doing well. We sometimes get there's support requests. We have to redirect those people. But yeah, we are goaura.com because, yeah, like 5 something million for aura.com at the time. Now it's probably 20. So yeah, fun times in domain land. That's for sure. Yeah, so kind of a problem here, right? Recently unable to delete mins and maxes, max prices in Seller Central. This still confuses me. I'm not sure why Amazon won't allow you to remove those at all. The alternative here in those cases is you set the min as low as you can that they will allow, and you set the max as high as they will allow. You basically want the range in Seller Central to be much wider than it would naturally be set in Aura in any way, shape, or form. If you have that, you're going to be okay. But yeah, kind of frustrating. I wish we had a solid solution there. We just don't. That's just Amazon being like, no, you can't do it. And there's no reason behind it. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. There's, I've yet to see a consistent pattern from talking to people. So it just kind of seems all over the place, which is, I know, very frustrating.
Yeah, haven't been able to find any patterns there either. I'm not sure if we were working together when we were looking at that, but a few tickets recently, they were like, I was able to delete it on half of them, but not the other half. And it's just like, there's no discernible 2 + 2 = fish sometimes in Amazon's world. So that's okay.
Exactly. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to walk you guys through some interesting things that are occurring. So let me get perfect. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so OpenAI has, and this was many months ago, came out with the 5 levels essentially of AI. This is how they're measuring progress. So level 1, conversational AI chatbots. We've had this for a little while. We just reached effectively level 2. So human level problem solving and reasoners. With the most recent model of O1, it does this. It actually, thinks before it answers, and it's trained to do that. The next version is 3. And what's interesting is the speed at which we went from the first version of this to the third version took a little bit longer, but each iteration, the time gets compressed further and further. And so the time it took to go from, first version of this to the latest version is much longer than going from the latest version of this to the first version of this. And we have what's called O1 preview. So it's not even the full version of the model quite yet. And they had something called Dev Day yesterday, where basically all the developers come out, they share cool, interesting things. And they demoed an agent making a phone call. So the whole thing was like, hey, I need 400 strawberries delivered at this venue and don't spend more than 1,500. It goes, okay, cool. Calls the person on stage his phone. They have a conversation back and forth. It gets done. What has been touted as of this week is the pace at which we will achieve this, because we've achieved this, just dramatically increased, like exponentially increased. So I've been, kind of geeking out and touting online and in these sessions, like, hey, listen, like AI agents are coming. What we call AI agents that exist today are not fully AI agents in the way that like OpenAI is thinking about it. Like the model itself can do these. We're really like hacking together a bunch of large language models and like kind of making it work, but it's not really resilient. But if you train something to be an agent at a foundational level, that unlocks a lot. And so already the theory is that 2025 will be the year of agents, which I very much believe, I think will be true. This is going to change the game for sellers 1,000%. Even the phone call thing, it had me thinking like, oh man, like could it call a distributor and open an account because you're like, hey, get really good at sales and dealing with objections. Here's what they tend to deal with. And it goes, okay, I know how to do that. Or could you say, hey, I need you to call this brand. I need, 150 units of SKU A and 200 units of SKU B. And this is the price that we previously used. Just get that sorted out for me and let me know when it's done. Wow. We're already talking about things that like may take us days, weeks, months to achieve, that an AI could do it in a few hours for us. And so if you start to, wrap your head around this as a seller and how this could affect all the different, moving pieces that you do, it could be very, very interesting, especially when you give it access to things like your tool, like your seller account and things of that nature. I have coined the term, and I will be most likely writing a blog post on this for next week, called the exponential seller. And I think there will emerge a new type of seller. And I think there already has to a certain degree, but a very tech savvy type of seller. They're utilizing software and data and things like AI way more than the average seller. And I think that's going to become a massive competitive advantage. So if you're not keeping up with the pace of change here, I think a lot of sellers are just like, that's like 2 to 3 years out. It's next year. And we're in Q4 for context. So a lot of interesting things happening here. It's very exciting. There's a lot of cool things. And what's so interesting is the cost of these things are exponentially lowering as the power and intelligence of them are exponentially growing. So eventually you'll be able to have 10 PhD level AIs helping you run your business. Imagine what that could do for you. I mean, everything's about to change. It's honestly, 2025 is going to be so weird and so exciting at the same time. Tesla apparently on the 12th or the 10th of this month is unveiling their robo taxis. So it's like a legit autonomous vehicle solely designed for robo taxi. Like, we're getting self-driving robo taxis and like real AI. And like 2025 is going to be incredible. Like, it's going to be unrecognizable in my opinion.
Yeah, I just had a friend who was in San Francisco for a long weekend, and they took an Uber with no driver.
Oh, no way. Oh, the Waymo?
Yeah, I forget if it was Waymo or whatever it is, but they're like only in San Francisco, which makes sense being the tech hub. But they said it's like I can't remember if they said that there's no driver's seat or there was maybe no headrest, so you can kind of see. And there's like a dashboard where you can kind of see what it's analyzing or whatnot. So definitely things picking up in terms of improvement speed and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see the next 18 months for sure.
Yeah, my stepdad FaceTimed me, was like, I'm in the thing right now. And he's like showing me it, and he's like geeking out. But yeah, I mean, these things are, but why should you care? Like, I mean, a lot of this could unlock new possibilities for sellers. They can. I mean, imagine not running out of space when doing RA. Like, people get vans and they're like, until the van is packed, I don't stop. But what if you could just constantly be like, hey, send me another one, pack out the trunk, and like go home and have your spouse unload it whenever it gets there, and it costs you $2. You just keep going, like you're removing all the friction and limitations in theory. And like, I'm kind of getting outlandish here for a moment, but just these are the things to think about though. It's just super exciting. See, John, you guys got get the new iPhone 16 or plan to get the new Apple Intelligence technology. So I do have the beta on my 15 Pro Max. I don't know if Apple Intelligence is truly coming to this. I've been told it is coming to this particular phone. I'm excited for it. What I currently have is basically just souped up Siri. I don't have the actual Apple Intelligence context aware stuff, but that's one of the things that I'm actually very excited for. Having been a long-term power user of shortcuts and creating automations and things like that, I've had to create those manually when I'm like, can you just do it for me? But, like as I'm meeting people, I met somebody last night and they're like, give me their contact information, or, they text me, hey, here's the address. I want to just pull it up and say like, hey, add this to their contacts. Cause I carry deep notes on everybody. So if I go to a friend's house and they have a gate code, I store that in my notes, because I'm not going to ask you every time, hey man, what's your gate code again? I got it. Right. I'm
the guy who would ask every time, but that's okay.
I used to be. I try to get better about it. But there's a friction in like going in the settings and hitting edit and like blah, 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 blah. But if I could just be like, do it, awesome. So yeah, I'm very bullish on it. I don't think I'm going to get the new phone personally. I have the maxed out 15 and love it. I don't know. That could change. We'll see. I'm very much watching it at a deep level, but in theory, that should also come to Mac OS, which it is. But I really haven't played too much with the current, text expansion, writing, rephrasing stuff on my phone. I write very short, so I don't really need it to do that often. And I use Superhuman for email. So I'm doing that in the app if I'm having it write an email for me. So hasn't hit me yet. We'll see how that changes. Are you considering the 16?
It's funny. My dad has been texting my sister and I because we're on like a family plan. He's like, I need to
Yeah.
get a new phone. So it's actually been like top of mind.
Okay.
I don't even know what iPhone I have. I think I have like a 13 or something. I'm not like the new version every time it comes out guy. I don't think
Yeah.
I'm quite like the power user that you are. So I haven't really been thinking about it too much. I do use like the speak to text, which works
Yeah.
really well. And I do text how I speak. So I'm not quite as like short and abbreviated. So it does pick
Yeah.
up on like my trends pretty well. I don't know if like the new AI or Apple intelligence technology would like really improve that a lot.
Right.
So I haven't been like itching to get it. If I happen to get it and it's not, and I get like a good trade in or whatever, I'll take it.
Sure.
But a phone's a phone to me. I don't really I don't dive too deep into like the app world and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm an AI maximalist, so I'm like, give me all of it,
Yeah,
but
it makes sense.
we'll see. See, Prince, Dylan, have you used advanced voice mode in ChatGPT? It's wild. So actually, I tried it for the first time right before we hit record because I forgot I got access to it. I was like, let me just have a quick conversation. And it did, weirdly enough, feel like having a real conversation with another person. Like there was no like, I'm now listening to what you're saying and I will pause. Like there was no like, there's no like indication that it was done. It was just like, we're just flowing and I could interrupt. And it was cool because I'm the guy, I'm going to give it tons of memory, right? So in the personalization section, I gave it as much detail about myself as I could. And when I first was like, hey, how's it going? I was, hey, Dylan. I was like, oh, like, even obviously it's got my name and stuff, but it was just kind of like, oh, this does feel very different than just using the voice mode on the previous version. I'm not sure how I'm going to use it because the immediate thing that I have a problem with is I want it to have far more context when having a conversation like a regular human would be. Like if I'm talking to a friend and they know a lot about me, that's a different level of conversation than me talking to a stranger trying to still have a deep level conversation. We still have to go through the learning curve, but even then it doesn't have a big enough context even in the singular conversation. So I think the next big thing that would really unlock a lot for me, I want it to have and learn as much about me throughout our conversations as it could. And I want it to be able to have access to my tools and the data inside my tools. So if I ask a question, I want things, even if it can't do the thing for me, but at least I can ask a question and it can give me an answer. Like, hey, when was the last time I emailed this person? Or, hey, like, what's the most high priority email in my inbox right now? Just give me the answer. Even that alone would be kind of nice. Ideally, the next stage of that is I could say, great, let them know I'm down. We can make this happen, blah, blah, blah. And like it writes it the way that I write and sends the email. That's like next stage. That's where you get more into like the AI agent kind of side of things. But it is wild. It is pretty wild. And what's so funny is like when you look at the timeline of these things, like GPT 4.0 is like what, 6 months old, maybe tops. So like and this is what I don't think a lot of sellers are really understanding is the pace at which things are getting better is exponentially increasing, meaning it's taking far less time every iteration to get far better. So again, this is not 2 years, this is now. And, just imagine the next 6 months, like it's going to be insane. It's going to be very exciting. See, Robert, I was just in LA for a week. The Waymos are everywhere. No passengers though. Yeah. I think it's on like a beta program. I think you have to be like invited or something like it's not open to everyone. I think you have to like accept a beta invite or something along those lines. I heard. I haven't used it. I haven't been to SF, but I've seen a lot of videos of people using them. But I've also seen some funny things where people like graffitiing the vehicles with a passenger inside and people just standing in front of it and like, it can't go if I'm here. So there's a weird social aspect to it that's kind of getting fleshed out, I think. But I think we do get to a point where if you don't want to own a car, you don't really need to. Like right now, my car is sitting in my garage and I'm technically paying for it. So like, if I only paid for a vehicle when I used it, it'd be far cheaper in total ownership. There's no maintenance, insurance taken care of, right? If it costs me $3 to go somewhere, awesome. Outside of obviously wanting a particular car because you enjoy that vehicle, if it's purely utilitarian, I don't know. And I read an article that parents are starting to put their kids in autonomous vehicles to take them to school and pick them up. And I'm like, Interesting. I haven't thought about that. You know, I have a kid, and I was like, I don't know if one, I'd be comfortable doing that. Two, it would save me a ton of time. You know, but is an autonomous vehicle actually going to sit in the line for like drop off in the mornings? You know what I mean? Or is it just gonna be like, get out now, right? Like I don't know how that works, but it's a again interesting world. I'm very bullish, optimistic on all this stuff. But yeah, it's exciting, you know. So I know we got 10 minutes here. So any other additional questions, please send them our way so we can dive deep into those with the time we have. But I think the big highlight of this particular live office hours is you need things that are flexible in your business that can react to things faster than you could. Things that you may not even be aware of. There's countless sellers right now that have no idea that a strike is occurring and that it could affect them next week, if not this week. And I think that's a good place to be at, which is what if I didn't have to be aware? What if I didn't have to care about these things that are occurring and my systems could react to those things, one, far faster and far better than I could, and two, I can just keep doing what I need to do, which is, again, sourcing. We've always said, like, your best time spent, the highest ROI for your time is sourcing inventory. So the more you can hand over to things like software, AI, I think the better. But this scenario that we're seeing kind of play out in real time, again, the strike officially kicked off yesterday morning, so we're still early into this, may or may not be a big deal, but it could absolutely shift how the market behaves. And what's nice is we've built Maven, which can handle that without you even being in the loop. And there's something impressive and interesting about that again, kind of makes you shift your mindset a little bit, which is nice. So hopefully you're aware of that. Hopefully you're utilizing Maven. If you're watching us and you're not using Aura, I would strongly recommend you give us a test, especially going into Q4. Your prices will increase. If you're manually setting max prices, I think you're setting yourself up for failure in a large way, with some exceptions, of course. But you need a repricer that can be dynamic, that can adjust not only its repricing itself, but the actual range, right? The upper end. As the demand continues to increase, the amount you can charge for products continues to also increase. And if you're unable to take advantage of that, you either risk losing out on profit on average, or you run out of inventory and you miss out anyways. And so what we want you to do is not miss out on any of that opportunity that's about to, very fast come to our doors. Let's see. And this will be our last question here. Could you recommend some AI tools that could assist sellers? Also, could you provide some methods on how to use AI models for Amazon business? Yes. Okay. So there's two primary tools that I think work specifically for sellers. The first one is Perplexity. Now, this is not built for sellers, but the thing that I love about Perplexity, and I recently got Razy on it and he's hyping it up on Twitter now, which is cool. A lot of, especially for newer sellers, you're learning very fast, right? You're having to understand certain terminology, how to do certain things, inventory management practices. And the way you typically go about answering these questions and learning is you type it into Google, you click through 30 something links, and then you hope you find a good answer. What Perplexity does is it will do all that link searching for you, find the actual answer to your question, and give you that answer, and then give you references to where it found the answer. And that could be on link 14, and let's say you stopped at 10, right? So you stopped too early. So in terms of learning and figuring things out from a business perspective, I think Perplexity is fantastic. Also just getting up-to-date information. Hey, what's the latest happening with Amazon? What's happening right now? What are big events that could be affecting me soon as an Amazon third-party seller? Getting that information, right? Like the strike. The second one, I've been talking about this idea of having a passive AI agent that is basically optimizing your listings in the background, right? So resellers don't do this. Why? Because it takes too much time, or it costs too much money, and it's not worth it because you're not on a listing forever. But if the cost and the time went down exponentially, it becomes kind of worth it, right? If you can increase your sales by 10% by doing nothing but paying $30 a month for this thing, yeah, you're probably going to do that in aggregate. It's going to add up. We're not there yet, but Smart Scout did come out with essentially like a assistant that will help you do optimization for listings. So it's not at the point where I think it's necessarily worth it for resellers, but we're getting closer there. Having a VA go and do this may start to make sense because the time to optimize each listing dramatically goes down. Again, I don't think we're quite there, but it's something to look at. If you're on listings that move a ton of volume, especially your replenishables, that's where I would heavily look at optimizing your listings, because a 10% bump in sales could be meaningful across your entire catalog. So those are the two major ones. A lot of the other stuff is more generalized, right? That's what really people are building right now, is generalized things. And of course, very, very niche things. So I use something called Howie.ai for scheduling meetings. So instead of me sending you a Calendly link, I just CC Howie on the email. It checks my calendar, emails you back, says, hey, Dylan's available on Tuesdays, but these 3 times. You say, great. Second time works best for me, adds it to our calendar, adds Zoom, we're done. And I was, the moment I hit send with CC'd Howie on it, I'm out of the loop. But if you're not scheduling a ton of meetings, it's irrelevant, right? But I think you can use ChatGPT, especially the new O1 preview, which is good at reasoning, that level 2 that I showed, as a thought partner, right? Like a brainstormer. Give it as much information as you can and be like, hey, I'm kind of struggling with this particular situation. Help me reason through this, or what are some things that I'm not considering that I should? Help me find the blind spots in my thought process here. So if you're kind of torn on a particular decision, or let's say you're struggling to analyze your data, right? You dump your data, throw it in there and say, okay, give me some interesting insights that would be helpful for me, that if I knew them and learned them, I could make more profitable decisions. And take that however you want. I think using it generally from that perspective is really nice. There's nothing that I've seen that's specific to Amazon sellers quite yet. My theory is that we will start to see that more so in 2025. Because what's going to happen is the models are moving so fast that I think people building applications on top of them are starting to get burnt out. Where the moment you have an amazing software sitting on top of GPT-4, O1 comes out, but it fundamentally works differently. And now you have to rethink the entire business model. And now end users don't want GPT-4 level. They want O1 level. So now you're outdated in 3 months. And so my theory is that the market's kind of either waiting for the settling point, or 2, trying to build applications where they can easily swap models and it just get better as the models themselves get better. I don't know how it's going to play out though. I really don't. But the moment I have awesome AI things for Amazon sellers, bet you will receive an email from me. I will share everything I can. But again, the issue right now is that things are moving so incredibly fast. And even for me, I have interesting ideas of how I would want to build applications with AI. But when O1 came out, I was like, well, that changes everything. Now it can just do the thing that I would have wanted it to do. It could just do it by itself without me having to build it. What's going to be here in 3 months? Like, why take the time to build certain things when the model itself can just do it natively better than I ever could, and I don't have to hack it? So I don't know what's going to happen. We're in this weird phase where things are just moving really, really fast, which is good, which is a very good thing. But I think it's giving a lot of developers pause right now. There's definitely a lot of development happening using AI, but they're kind of having to freeze the model that they're using to make it work generally, and then rethink the entire business model as new things come about. So see, do you have a weekly or monthly newsletter that is sent out? So we don't. I do a weekly blog post every Monday. So if you're an Ord user, you should get that email. I write about a bunch of different things, but as big events occur and big things like that, I'll basically turn that into a blog post and then, let you guys know that I tweet quite a lot on things too. So follow me on Twitter. There's definitely anything that I'm just kind of even messing around with or interested in, I'll share there. Because some things are just more nerdy and not really applicable to the average person. So I'm not going to share that with you guys because you're like, I can't use this, man. What are we doing here? See, Marissa, this was my first office hours. I learned a lot and will be attending in the future. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to wrap up here for time. Appreciate, again, everybody making the time. We do this every week. on Wednesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. EST, unless we otherwise let you know. And it's open office hours, meaning there's no real format here outside of you ask amazing questions, we answer them. And if there's any dead space, we're going to fill it with awesome nerdy things to kind of get your gears turning. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to support, talk with Casey, talk with Finn. If you have not done a personal onboarding, please reach out to support and request one. We love doing them. They're 20 minutes. We take you from kind of overwhelmed. Maybe it's your first repricing tool and you're a new seller to you feel like a power user right after that. So make sure everybody's taken care of here. And if you're not already using Aura or you're considering making the switch, don't hesitate to ask us questions. We're here to help. We're not very salesy, if at all. But if you have questions or you're like, I really want to get set up with a repricer, but I'm not sure how to get started, just ask us. We're happy to help you guys get started. But Casey, any last parting words?
No last words here. Thanks again for a good session here, folks, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.